Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's Xtalks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Revisioning Life Sciences Through the FHIR Gateway. My name is Ryan Muse, and I'll be your Xtalks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, and if you require any assistance, you can please contact me at any time by sending a message using this same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Citius Tech, who developed the content for this presentation. Citius Tech is a strategic partner and specialist provider of healthcare technology services and solutions to some of the world's largest healthcare organizations. Citius Tech works at the edge of digital transformation. It focuses on multiple areas of digital technology, such as business intelligence, mobility and IoT, big data, cloud computing, predictive analytics, and data science. Their services and solutions include healthcare software development, healthcare interoperability, regulatory compliance, BI analytics, management consulting, consumer engagement, care coordination, and population health management. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Srijit Nair has over 22 years of experience across technology consulting, program management, business development, account management in healthcare, digital convergence, and IT outsourcing space with Fortune 100 companies in US and Europe. At Citius Tech, he heads the life sciences business in US and Europe, responsible for business development and sales and account management. Prior to Citius Tech, he worked with IT consulting companies and programmed and performed wide-ranging leadership roles, including leading sales operations transformation. Ed Hammond has provided vision and leadership in most aspects of health informatics over 50 years. His current research is in data visualization, realizing interoperability using HL7 FHIR, SMART, and CDS hooks, app development, registries, EHRs, human metrics, and data elements. He is also committed to the concept of learning health as the primary way in which we can most effectively increase the quality and performance of healthcare. He has an NCATS grant to automate and digitize the entire process in support of a single IRB for multiple site IRBs. And Wayne Kubik has over 30 years leadership experience in information technology for life sciences research and development among pharmaceuticals, CROs, technology, and consulting companies. He is the Chief Technology Officer for Health Level 7 International, an ANSI-accredited standards development organization. He leads HL7 work groups to develop and maintain HL7's product lines, and he was formerly Chief Technology Officer for CDISC, the leading SDO for pharmaceutical clinical research. And so now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to our very first speaker today, Ed Hammond. You may begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to provide the perspective of the environment in which we are talking about the use of standards. And if you were to give me the first slide, please. I would like to introduce you to a different look at health. And what the first comment I would make is I think I'm focusing on health more than health care, because I think the future is going to be really looking at health. And I think most people would acknowledge that the current healthcare system is broken. And our goal is to have the healthiest population at the best cost. And I point out that I'm using the word best cost, not the words lowest cost, because I think that health demands that we spend what we have to spend to provide that healthy environment. So I'm not trying to design a system that would be the lowest cost kind of system that you were talking about. Interoperability is a word that has been around for a long time. At the birth of HL7, it's a word that we started with, but we only focused on the technical components of interoperability and the semantic components of interoperability, and felt that the standard we created dealt with the technical, and the existing sets of terminology provided the semantic part of that. But interoperability is not achieved by solving just one problem. And I think that's an important thing to understand. FHIR is only one part of the solution. Much more is required to achieve a solution to interoperability. And as an example of what I'm talking about is FHIR may provide a container for a particular data element, but it doesn't tell you exactly what data element to put in it in terms of how it's expressed, in terms of terminology, vocabulary, of whatever words you want to use. And people also may fill in the blanks that they want to fill in and not fill the blanks that they want to fill in. So the first problem we've got really is having the exact data that we want to move from place to place. Interoperability also means that the people that are using the standard have to understand what the standard is used for. And so part of their contributions to interoperability is sending the right data at the right time. We need to define what we really want to do. And when we look at the best way to do it, then that's what we should try to bring into effect. And again, typically the way we do what we do is we start with a solution, and then we look for a way to apply the solution to the problem, rather than looking at the problem and finding what solutions we can use to do with it. So I think our whole way of dealing with it has really got to change perspective. And I'll have a few more remarks to make about that at the end of my remarks. We need to have big data for delivering healthcare, because much of what we are worried about is having all the data we need about the patient. And going all the way back to my first remarks of where the focus is, it really needs to be a focus on the patient. And if we concentrate on the patient, what we need to do is to understand what we need to do to make that patient the healthiest individual with the highest quality of life and the longest length of life that's possible for that particular individual. And to do that, we really need to have big data for a number of reasons. One is to have everything to know about the patient. Number two is to have a database for data analysis and for discovering new knowledge. It's a continuous process. It's a changing process. COVID is an example of that, of where we really need to know more and more about COVID, which means we need big data, complete and interoperable in a way that we can do the analytics to know what we really need to do with that. But we also need to know outcomes, and we need to evaluate the outcomes to see if we're achieving of what you really are talking about. So in the next slide, I want to talk about some of the simple rules that I'm talking about. The first comment is keep it simple. Simplicity is much more difficult than complexity. And it's easier to do a complex system, sticking things together in an unorganized way, than it is to try to deal with it at the simple level that we're talking about. So simplistically speaking, we need to be able to track patients whenever and wherever they are. And patients are a very mobile group. They move between regions, they move between states, they move between countries, and yet all of that experiences contribute to what we need to know to provide the better health for those individuals that we can. We need to minimize the effort of collecting the data. And that's a very challenging thing that we have to worry about doing, because entering data that you don't have a use for is challenging to get people to do it. So we need to make sure that our users understand why they are entering the data that's required, how we want that data entered, and what value that data is really going to be. And we need to think about ways of solving that problem. We need to minimize the effort of using the data, and this may be user specific. If you think about most of the current EHR systems, the data is stored as the way the data is entered. So 3 different clinics enter the same piece of data. They're typically stored in different places. But a user is interested in that piece of data, whether it's a blood pressure, and they don't want to have to sort between 3 or 4 different blood pressures to know what to use. So it needs to be the right data for the right patient at the right time. We need to consolidate the data from multiple uses. Even though the majority of systems now have an electronic health record, I think Duke is typical of most institutions. We have lots of other data that applies to a patient's health and health care. For example, images, for example, genetic data, for example, social determinants of health. All of these are data elements that we need to know, but typically they're in separate databases, and the user has to go looking for the data and sorting through the data for what they want. The focus on data flow ought to be on how it's used. We need for the computer systems to think for the users. So if the user wants to get the answer to a question, a query-based process, then the user doesn't need to have to pick through all sorts of data to get to that point. So it needs to be consolidated in answering the question without making the user do it. Mobile health needs to become a reality. We talk about learning health systems, and we talk about the value of that, but we need to know what it is that we're learning, why we're learning, and how to use what we're learning. And bottom line is we need to automate everything as a go. So the next slide, please. So maybe the bright lighting of the impact of COVID-19 is the fact that it's telling us a little bit of how bad the system has been and how we cannot tolerate the quality of the systems and the design of the systems that we currently have. So the first thing it did is to introduce us to a virtual world. And now we're living in the world of Zoom meetings. This seminar is an example of what we're talking about. It has done wonders to advance telemedicine. I think we've advanced telemedicine in a few months, what we have not done in the previous 10 to 15 years. And mobile health and mobile devices is now an extremely important part of the healthcare process. But we're also learning that we need to focus on more than just the clinical data that we're talking about. It's the total part of the system we're talking about. And we need to be able to track supplies and materials from end to end, from the manufacturer to all the places it's stored, to ultimately getting to the patient and the physician to be able to use that equipment at the time that they need it. We need to build aggregated data sets from multiple institutions. Sharing data now is almost understood to be mandatory, but to put data together that is totally different is extremely impossible to do. So that's one of the things that we need to deal with. We need to extract the data from EHR systems and transport that data to a central site. HL7 now has advanced a version of this standard called bulk data transfer that I think you will hear from a little bit later from Wayne as to what that really is, but it really is essential for the research perspective of what we're doing. But there's data outside of clinical data, as I've said several times. We need to track and report in test data. And again, this is a challenge because typically test data is done remotely and is not connected necessarily to a hospital. So how do we move that data back into the healthcare setting so that it's available to everybody that needs to know it? Data protection and privacy is extremely important and challenging now because disease is no longer a personal thing. COVID-19 not only involves some individual with the disease, but involves all the individuals they come into contact with. There are issues here dealing with the ethics of the research associated with this and the privacy of the data itself. We need to uniquely track patients across multiple institutions. So we need to do patient matching. Again, a challenge that's imperfect, and we need to find a perfect solution for that. And we need to use increasingly decision support algorithms, largely evidenced by some sort of phenotype. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I've become aware of over the years is that now I think and I'm very happy that we've done this, we reached what I call 3 major spheres involving the use of standards. The first of that is the people that develop the standards. These are the technical gurus that really focus on creating the standards. And they really don't look beyond the creation of those standards. The second group is the people that implement. Now, there's overlap between the standards developers and the implementers, but the implementers are the ones that take the standard and introduce it into the real world. But there's another important group that's now becoming increasingly important and increasingly visible. These are the users of the standards, and they care less about the technology of creating the standards. They really are not as interested in the implementation, but what they are is interested in the enablement, that the presence of the standards and the implementation of the standards that bring them together. And there needs to be a feedback loop that goes from each group to each group as to what really is required. So the users need to be able to define what the standards makers and the standards implementers need to do for him. Now, HL7 has created a new type of membership within the organization that are called accelerators. And I've listed some of the accelerators here. I won't talk very much about these, but I'll mention that Da Vinci is focusing on the payer community. The Caring is focusing on providers and some aspects of reimbursement. The Code X people are focusing on oncology and the standards required for that. Gravity project is focusing on social determinants of health. The Vulcan system is focusing on the research aspect of this, and two other groups that are sort of becoming accelerators maybe. One of these is the genomics community, and genomics is really widespread. There are a number of groups that's working in this area. HL7 is participating, but it's not directly an accelerator. And Devices on FHIR is another group that hasn't really become an accelerator, but devices now are becoming increasingly important with wearables, sensors, and mobile devices and things of that nature. So next slide, please.
All right.
So
we have a yes, thank you very much. We have a poll question for everyone to interact with. This should be appearing on your screen right now. You can vote on this by selecting any of the answers you see in front of you and then clicking submit. The question we have for you is, what is the biggest challenge in a healthcare life sciences IT today? Your answer options are interoperability and multiple standards, data quality, data mapping and management, software development, implementations, or other. Again, the question we're asking you is, what is the biggest challenge in healthcare life sciences IT today? It looks like most of you have voted. Thank you for your participation. Let's take a look at those results. All right, coming in at 44%, data quality, interesting, 40% for interoperability and multiple standards, 8% for both software development and implementation, and no one selected other. So once again, thank you for your participation in that. It is back to you.
Thank you. So one of the things that I find it difficult to do, because I'm really trying to spend my time and energy now with the user community, is trying to explain to them what FHIR is. And you cannot talk technology to this community. And so I'm trying to find an analogy that would help explain that. So I say you've got a pantry that has ingredients in it, and I think these ingredients are akin to resources. And then I have a recipe book that tells me how to use some of these resources to do what I want to do, and that I call profiles. And if we want to do a particular task, for example, admission or order a drug or something of that nature, we can pull the recipe for doing that, pull the resources that we need to make that happen, and create a specific dish. But we need more than one dish. We need a full setting. And so we do the full meal in which you do multiple part of these. So the next slide, please. So I'm going to speed up a little bit in terms of what I'm talking about. So I've been a little bit more long-winded than I want to be. I want to talk about speaking the same language. And the Tower of Babel is something we've used for a long time. And I'm going to take the center bullet here, display, to talk about one of the projects that a number of people are involved with, the N3Cs, the National COVID Cohort Collaborative, sponsored by NCATS. It is bringing together somewhere in the vicinity of 7 different institutions that are sharing their data to create a single database to use for COVID research. They're using several common data models, and I put the word uncommon because there's differences. Pcori, ACT, which is the I2B2, OMOP, which is part of Odyssey, and Trinetics. And one of the problems that we're having is trying to put square pegs sometimes in round holes and vice versa. It's really showing us what we really need to do to solve some of these problems. The University of California, and that's the plural, has put together all of the systems as part of the University of California system, and they're using a common vocabulary, they're using a common standard, they're using a single common database among all the institutions. So they're bringing that data together, and it works. The beautiful part about it is they can make daily reports of the status of COVID in the state of California, and it's very impressive what they're doing. The U.S. is trying to get some degree of interoperability by defining the U.S. core data, the U.S. core data for interoperability. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit of defining and using data. So defining data, we need a master set of data elements with attributes that are very rich. We need the data elements to be self-defining. They should be defined at the most finely grained level, and we should have included in that, you know, what the code is, what the synonyms might be, precise and unambiguous definitions, and FHIR itself, using those, can become a canonical model. Using the data, using these common data sets, we can do phenotypes, we can do decision support algorithms, we can create risk factors, norm models, we can create registries, we can create nodal models, and we need common data sets for specific purposes. Next slide. So this is my last slide. We need to create a data box. All of the data about a patient with a single access point. Could be multiple different databases, but it's unknown to the user. I ask the data box to give me something, and it gives it to me. Clear and simple. We need to define the role of AI and machine learning to use and manage data. Instead of making the clinician search through the database and find what they want, we should use AI to understand what the physician needs and provide that data. We need to develop the tools and functionalities to appropriately provide access, trust, accountability, and responsibility. We need to replace the concept of secondary data with multiple uses of data. So the use of data for research ought to be on the same level as the use of data for clinical support. So multiple use is what we can afford to do and put the data that we want to use. We need closer ties between randomized clinical trials, observational research, and pragmatic clinical trials. We can track and control everything related to health from start to finish. And now over to Wayne that tells us the standards that's going to let all of this happen. Wayne?
Well, thank you, Ed. And it's always a great pleasure for me to pick up after Ed and carry on the conversation. And for those of you who don't know Ed, he's a really legendary figure in the world of healthcare research and life sciences, and has been a mentor and inspiration to many. He's also a lot of fun to work with, so I always enjoy working with you. So thank you, Ed, and thank you all of you for joining me today. I don't know if you can see over here, I'm wearing my I voted button today. I hope all of you are focused on that too if you're in the US. I'm going to pick up a little more details about what FHIR actually means to the life sciences world, and a little better idea of how it all works. A few words first of all about the HL7 itself. I hope most of you are familiar with it, but we're an ANSI accredited standards organization. We've been developing standards for more than 30 years. The HL7 V2 standard, which Ed and his founding members developed more than 30 years ago, is still really the mainstay for moving information around within healthcare systems. It's sort of dealing with payments and orders to the labs and all kinds of information. The CDA standard is a document standard that came in place. It became very visible within the US with meaningful use, but it's used around the world as a document-based representation of healthcare information. And our latest generation of standards is FHIR. And the reason I joined HL7 is actually our vision statement, which I think is a very compelling statement that energizes me every time. And that's a world in which everyone can securely access and use the right health data when and where they need it. And we often think of that in terms of, well, it's healthcare providers to labs to pharmacy, but it's really research as well in life sciences. I mean, research and life sciences are part of healthcare. It didn't always look that way a few decades ago, but really when you get down and look at the information, there's a significant amount of overlap. Research may go a little deeper in some areas and may ignore others, but we are dealing with the same information, and it all centers around patients. And HL7's mission is to develop the standards to make global health data interoperability possible. Next slide, please. So the next slide is my FHIR in a glance. I sort of cram a lot of information in here. But first of all, the diagram on the right, just want to bring up, is provided from the Office of the National Coordinator in the US. In fact, they're a FHIR at Scale task force. And it's an interesting way to look at things in the context of what Ed was just talking about. You can see all the different use cases and opportunities they provide over here. And the idea is what they see as FHIR as being the path to get us to interoperability. Like Ed said, it doesn't solve all our problems. But what it does do is provide a platform standard that gives us the opportunity to solve our problems. The initial piece of where FHIR came out was providing a next generation standard based on the experience HL7 gained in the prior decades. But really with the focus on simplicity, something else that Ed suggested or talked about, and implementation, providing standards that are actually doing things, doing positive things to solve problems. We're currently at base R4, and this is the first version of FHIR that has normative content. Normative being it's an ANSI accredited standard with stability built in and backwards compatibility ensured. So it's really ready for use based on that. The technology platform of FHIR is based on REST and RESTful APIs essentially. And you all use REST every time you pick up your phone or open up a browser. This is the fundamental technology of the World Wide Web. This is how when you're using Facebook or Twitter, or even perhaps let's say a travel website to book an airline ticket, you don't really have 20 different logins to every different individual airline or auto rental agency. You basically go to one place and the individual systems talk to each other to pass the necessary information to solve the question that you're trying to find, such as, well, in the old days, booking an airline ticket, not so much these days on that. So APIs are sort of the fundamental way of sharing data over the web so that systems can interact with one another, the pull that they need at a very granular level. Within the US, the US government, through the Office of the National Coordinator, has set a final rule that requires all healthcare providers to provide FHIR-based APIs under the 21st Century Secures Act. CMS has a similar rule that requires all those involved in payer and provider interactions to also do this. And this means that this infrastructure will be a core part of the US technology base for healthcare throughout the US. The third major point about FHIR is it's based on resources, and resources are sort of building blocks of information. You can think of a resource as, it's not quite the same as a database table or a record. It's really more like a web page. You look at a page full of information. That's kind of how a resource has lots of different information that's structured and characterized. Within FHIR, there are basic concepts like a resource for patient or a practitioner and medication. There's several of those, and so we'll talk about those in a minute. And another core rule here is the 80% rule. While FHIR is intended to be a path to interoperability that can be built to be modified and employed to solve all kinds of healthcare information related problems, the goal is to represent within the core standard the 80% common needs that everyone has. Everything to do with healthcare, everyone deals with patients and their practitioner providers who are dealing with that. And so there are resources to base that. But you can't address every edge case and unique specific problem of every possible use. And so there's an extension mechanism and the use of profiling to tailor the core specification to solve specific needs. FHIR is independent of output. You can reuse FHIR to represent web pages, to send messages like V2, to send documents like CDA, or just to provide services that can be accessed by systems. And summarizing is the three major pillars of FHIR. It's a technology platform. The technology platform I use throughout the modern world of the internet. It's a data model, how to represent health-related data. And probably most of all, it's an active global community with tens of thousands of people working together, collaborating, sharing ideas, helping each other out, putting this incredibly powerful tool to use. to really help us get to the stage of interoperability that we all would like to see, where we don't worry about things about whether our doctor, if we go into an emergency room, knows whether or not we're allergic to a medicine, where we have all the information we need to take care of our elderly parents and our children. And the best summary of FHIR is the quote on the bottom right from Graham Grieve, who's the father of FHIR, which is the web for healthcare. And if you could think about where the World Wide Web was in the mid-90s, when we had our first browsers and we had all kinds of things just popping up, companies like Amazon were just getting started, and eBay, and things that we didn't even conceive of, like the App Store from Apple, weren't there yet. Well, that's where we are with FHIR. It's a mechanism to basically totally transform the world of healthcare, really take us where we need to be to improve global healthcare. Next slide, please. Now, as I said, one of the key pieces within FHIR is the notion of resources, and I'm sure you can't read this, especially if you're looking at a small pad screen or something. But if you go to hl7.org/FHIR, you'll come to this dashboard, which summarizes the building block resources that form the fundamental backbone of which FHIR. It also takes you to the complete specification with all the additional information you need. And there's 5 layers to this particular model, starting out with the fundamental technology platform things of an API and REST. But there's also pieces that you might not think of normally as being part of the toolkit. Like, for example, a series of resources dealing with security and privacy, which need to be put together to make sure that the information is limited to the right people, and advanced terminology services and other implementation support capabilities. Level 3 is sort of the fundamental core. That's where we deal with the patient and the provider, the 2 basic centers of all the information we have. And at level 4 is where we get into the detailed type clinical information we're used to, where we actually talk about vaccines and medications and observations and other things. And the level 5, which is where we're just getting to and just tapping into now, some of the things that Ed was envisioning, which is where clinical reasoning and analytics get involved. Once you present the data in a standardized structure that is easily accessed by a technology, no matter where you are, you can begin to really understand and delve a whole lot deeper into the possibilities. And we're seeing some of these things happening before our eyes now with the pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, this is a cut of the US core data for interoperability, which is one of the outputs of the Office of the National Coordinator. What these do are basically the minimum data set of information that needs to be provided from a FHIR-based API under the final rules. And don't think of them just as variables or as data set metadata definitions. There's more to it than that. For example, the first 6 of these at the top all correspond to, within the world of CDIS, the demographics table, but that's all within FHIR. It's the patient resource. And so, these things are all attributes or elements of a particular patient description. There are others, such as laboratory tests and vital signs. Well, these are represented within FHIR as the observation resource. And an observation is basically anything that could be observed about a patient. It's pretty fundamental. And this is where you need profiling, because what profiling does, it tells you what additional things. For vital signs, you might need the body position. For laboratory tests, you need to know then the name of the test and the units of the results. And so these things all are basically, all of these USCDI data classes are represented within FHIR by a implementation guide called the US Core Implementation Guide. What's important about this is this is the information that every one of these APIs will have available that can be built upon. Secondly, ONC has established a process where they were providing updates to expand this list every year. And this list will then be expanded and profiled in the FHIR Core, US Core IG. And what this is going to build out more and more an entire universe of information that we'll be able to apply more and more in the future for research purposes and other applications to sort of stretch along the boundaries of healthcare. And certainly get us to really bring together this convergence of life sciences and healthcare, which is happening before our eyes. Next slide, please. Now, another component of FHIR, another API associated with FHIR, is the SMART API. And what SMART actually predates, the original work on SMART predates the actual creation of FHIR. Well, the idea of SMART was very similar to your App Store in Google or Apple. And basically a mechanism where you could tack any application of your choice onto a data server and be able to use it in new and interesting ways. This particular thing is what energizes the applications economy, which Dr. Don Rucker, the current U.S. National Coordinator, really understands deeply, about how you basically make the data available for multiple purposes and make it easy to absorb, not just by physicians, but also by patients and researchers and others. What SMART provides is a framework that allows an end user to tap into data, and if authorized, be able to get the data available to their app. Many of you who have iPhones might be aware of the Apple Health Kit that is already doing this with FHIR. They could tap in and present your health record with your lists of medications and your conditions and put them on your phone so you have it available to share with physicians when you're going to a specialist from one place to another. And what SMART uses is the internet technologies of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. These are the same things you have when you go on, sign up to a new website, and they ask if you want to sign on with your Google or your Facebook ID. You can use that same ID over and over again. This is absolutely fundamental to the notion of how FHIR can help really transform the world of research. It makes it possible for a patient, when they sign an informed consent and agree to point in a clinical trial, to make their data available to the research community at that point in time. Extremely powerful concept that we couldn't do before. Next slide, please. And there's an example of a way that the SMART technologies with FHIR can really help change the way we think about medical information. This is an application. It's available in the SMART App Store already as an open source app. It's been implemented widely by Intermountain Healthcare, among others. And what it is just a way to have a parent monitor the growth of their children, to say, are they of a healthy, normal weight, and they can do this. This is so much easier to absorb than reading through pages of information on a PDF you have to do. And you have to think about the possibilities of what the API and FHIR can allow, where all kinds of things that we currently struggle with can be quickly absorbed at a glance and really help us to understand what's going on. Next slide, please. I think we may have a quiz coming up. So back to you, Ryan.
Thank you. Yes, we have another poll question for audience members to interact with. As before, this should be on your screen right now. Select any of the options and then click submit. The question we have is, would you say that your organization understands the potential efficiencies for quality data collection enabled by FHIR? Your answer options are no awareness across departments. Quality teams understand the efficiencies FHIR can enable. Quality teams and other departments understand FHIR potential, or leadership performed FHIR-enabled business planning, WRT. Again, the question is, would you say your organization understands the potential efficiencies for quality data collection enabled by FHIR? It looks like most of you have voted, so thank you very much for taking the time to do so. Let's take a look at what options you selected. It looks like 65% have said no awareness, 15% leadership have performed FHIR-enabled business planning, 10% though for both of the other options for quality teams and other departments understanding the FHIR potential. So thank you so much again for your participation. It's back to you, Wayne.
Yes, and so we'll be getting into why we're here doing this. Is because we recognize people don't recognize the opportunities yet to realize it. That's why we're here. So I'm going to move, like Ed, I'm going to move a little more quickly. Here's another feature of FHIR, which is the CDS hooks application. And what CDS hooks does, it's a way of essentially putting a monitor or daemon into an EHR to see when things happen and to trigger some sort of event-based response. And so what CDS hooks does is that it can be set up, and it's already being largely supported by a couple of the major EHR vendors already. If something happens, like for this particular example, if a physician prescribes a certain drug to a patient, the CDS monitoring service might say, oh, prescription, and take a look at that prescription and say, wait a minute, you've prescribed a proprietary drug. There's a generic available with the same profile for 1/10 the cost. Do you want to consider that? And what happens with the CDS hook is it watches what's going on. If it sees a triggering event, it basically provides some sort of response. And these are done in the forms of cards. It could be an information card, like in this case, here's a cheaper medication you might consider. It could be a suggestion card that maybe you should change the prescription. Or it could be actually a card that invokes an application. Hey, here's a disease monitoring app that might be helpful to this patient. And so this is an extremely powerful concept, because you can think of within a clinical research study, for example, an SAE, and automatically trigger some sort of a notification that will very quickly get responses, to minimize a safety threat to a patient. Or you can think about it as protocol deviations. Next slide, please. And keep track of those and fix them at the source. Another thing that Ed mentioned before is the bulk data API. And so those of you in life sciences are used to moving big data sets around, like, for example, in the world of CDIS, moving these domain data sets. Well, within FHIR, normally within FHIR, you're thinking on a transactional basis on, like a patient at a time. But if you want to do things like public health, or you want to be doing things like analyzing value-based care from large populations, you want a whole bunch of patients together. And so what the FHIR API does, FHIR bulk data API does, is it generates a flat file structure in a standardized format that can be used just like a CDIS domain data set to populate analysis, warehouses, databases that can be used to do further work with the data. And really all it does is it basically sends out a query for entire population worth of data and punches out a bunch of files. It's one file per resource, just like it's similar to a CDIS domain. Next slide, please. This is another ONC. FAST is the FHIR at Scale Task Force, another initiative ONC. They recognize that putting the technology out there is only part of the problem. And there's a big part of work in actually putting these to work and implementing them in a secure, regulated environment. And so FAST is doing things like this. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically a lot of the features of why they feel FHIR should be adopted. What FAST is trying to do is provide guidance to implementers on how to do it effectively, safely, and conformingly, just to make sure you're doing it right, just helping people absorb this information as the deadline of the rule comes much closer. Next slide, please. And this slide here, this subheading here actually refers to the blue map at the top. Just a quick sense is that we're not just talking the US, and we're talking FHIR. The one on the right is a listing of sessions that have unique sessions accessing the HAPI server. The HAPI server is maintained out of Toronto, Canada by James Agnew, is one of the key operators within the FHIR world, and it's used as a development and reference server for lots of people who are learning how to work with FHIR. And you can see that there are hotbeds throughout all continents, not so much in Africa yet, but actually a lot more than there was last year. And you can see big hotbeds in Asia and Europe and the US in particular. The ones at the bottom are actually ONC slides, and they are talking about the availability of FHIR capabilities right now. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're being used, but what they mean is the dark reds on the left-hand map indicate up to 100%, 90 to 100% of sites that have access to an EHR that supports FHIR. They may not have turned it on, but it's there. That capability already exists. And on the right, it's showing the dark colors again, are the ones, the dark blue ones are the ones that have no access to FHIR. Just a couple little spots on the map, but the dark orange ones again represent physicians who have access to FHIR APIs. So this is becoming very quickly a part of the infrastructure, global infrastructure for health technology. Next slide, please. Now, where we're going with FHIR, it really originated with healthcare, with the necessity of 21st century cures to make health data available to patients and to share, so they could share with their providers. But now, recently, Ed mentioned accelerators. Vulcan is our newest accelerator, which is just getting started now, and it's focused on life sciences. And it's a collaborative organization that has participation from all of these groups I'm listing over here. Yes, including patients. Yes, extreme involvement from government agencies, from the National Institutes of Health, from the FDA, from global organizations as well, and from the pharma industry and technology vendors, both in research and healthcare. Next slide, please. And these are some of the things that Vulcan is trying to do. It's trying to leverage what FHIR can do, and also help with this convergence of healthcare and life sciences research. Put together the right parties who are all doing things in the world of research, help them collaborate and benefit from each other, and pull together their resources to actually develop solutions. Vulcan is just in the process now of enlisting new participants, and if your organization would like to join the activity, you can find out about it more by going to hl7.org/Vulcan. Next slide. And so this is my concluding slide over here, which is that, as I've been saying, what FHIR does is it gives us the opportunity to do things that we couldn't even conceive of before. Before the World Wide Web appeared, no, I don't. It would have been very hard for anyone other than Tim Berners-Lee to figure out where it would lead and how much it's evolved. And that's what's happening to the world of healthcare. There are many different types of applications for FHIR that can happen, and especially when you understand this fundamental infrastructure that the FHIR APIs are there to use for research as well as internal healthcare. In fact, it would be absolutely immoral and inappropriate not to take care of these opportunities. FHIR is already mature enough. It's already out there. It's going to become part of, within the US, it's going to become part of the regulated, mandated infrastructure. It's used throughout the world as well. There are other countries developing national health systems based entirely on FHIR. And it's really up to the industry to seize this opportunity and realize the benefits. To segue back to something Ed said about learning health systems and things, the way I see FHIR, where it will take us, and again, it doesn't have all the solutions. It gives us the pieces we need to solve all of the problems, but we really need people in the life sciences industry to take us up and take us there. But the way I think about that is basically FHIR is a mechanism that can inform research at the point of care, and informing care itself with evidence-based information based on the most current research. And that's how you have to think about this. Things converging into real time about making information available to who needs it and using it right away to really improve the state of global healthcare. That's what I love about FHIR. That's why I got signed up to it. Come join us. We need everyone if we're going to make this work. That's it. Thank you.
All right, so we've got another poll question we'd like to run right now. This one is a lot simpler. That's simply asking, are you planning to do a clinical study in the future that involves direct data capture from EHRs? The answer options are yes, no, or not sure. Please take a moment to consider how best to answer appropriately for yourself or your company. You're all so fast at this one. Thank you very much. Let's see the results. All right, 50% for yes, 40% for not sure, and 10% for no. So thank you again for your participation on this one. I believe now we're handing it to Shrajit Nair.
Thank you, Ryan. Ed and Wayne, thank you so much. It's an honor and privilege to be here with you, gentlemen. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking time out for this webinar. It's hard to top what Wayne and Ed have already said. They are industry stalwarts. So I'm just going to stick myself to giving you a very quick preview of some of the observations that we have come across in our conversations with a lot of our customers and prospective clients. Actually, in some ways, I like to reference what Ed spoke about earlier when he mentioned about bringing in, getting in more closer ties between randomized controlled trials, observational research, and pragmatic clinical trials. In many ways, that's kind of a starting point for a lot of pharma companies in trying to bring the world closer to manage the end-to-end drug management cycle. We see a lot of growing evidence in terms of bringing in different devices, data formats from different sources to drive real-world evidence, actually, which in turn helps to generate a lot of informed decisions on the back of the data that gets accumulated real time, as well as data that comes in very clean. Actually, I heard Paul talk about need for more data quality, and FHIR in many ways really helps us to solve that problem of bringing in or acquiring clean data. Actually, the whole concept of real world evidence has gathered a lot of pace in the pharma world. Actually, we see there is a growing evidence of a lot of pharma companies wanting to look not only at claims data but also looking at genomic data, bringing in imaging data to create a longitudinal record, which in turn can then help drive a lot of outcomes, which also includes treatment pathways, which also includes coming up with early diagnosis, early prognosis, stratifying patients into different risk categories, and then helping the physicians to drive treatment pathways, which are very informed in nature for them and very specific to the particular patient. Actually, most importantly, what we see the adoption of FHIR is also in the post-COVID world is the global research connectivity that it really establishes. Actually, Wayne spoke about that in some ways. Actually, this is sort of a tipping point, at least from where we have seen in a lot of our conversations. The adoption of FHIR should definitely gain a lot of pace in the current world. The next slide, please. So we just try to give you a little sense of the areas that we have seen more and more conversations starting up. Actually, so the clinical operations, the R&D part of it, we see there is a growing evidence of CROs in particular looking at FHIR adoption for the decentralized clinical trials, the virtual clinical trials. On the patient engagement side, we have seen a lot of desire on pharma companies to come up with clinical decision support tools that can ultimately rest with the physicians, who in turn can invoke it through the EHRs. Wayne actually spoke about that in the concept of smart apps. Actually, this is an area where we have seen an increased adoption of pharma companies really trying to leverage FHIR, given the fact that there is Epic and some of these EHR companies already having FHIR enabled their EMRs. It becomes a little more easier for physicians to have a one-stop shop actually in terms of invoking information that they really want at their disposal. The data transformation part, the desire for a lot of these pharma companies to have a seamless data value chain, which, like I mentioned earlier, revolves around bringing in genomic data. There's a considerable amount of focus in trying to look at longitudinal record, especially in the context of omics data, in the context of imaging data, to create a better a platform that can help researchers create a collaboration mechanism between external and internal researchers, academicians, universities, and affiliates, actually, even in turn going all the way across to other universities and to other government organizations. These are areas that we have seen increased adoption of FHIR, or at least there is a growing evidence of conversations of FHIR, actually. The next slide, please. I think there is a poll coming along.
Yep, so this is the last poll that we've got to run for today. So once again, we do appreciate everyone's participation in these. It's wonderfully insightful. The question this time and for the last time is, what, according to you, is the biggest benefit of direct data capture at source from EHRs? Your answer options are lowest cost of study build, queries, and monitoring, ensuring highest quality data, real-time availability of data sets for faster response time, or I'm not sure. Please take a moment to answer. You all have submitted answers very quickly. Again, thank you so much. Let's take a look at the results. This time for this one, it's 72% for real-time availability, 17% ensuring highest quality data, 11% lowering the cost of study build, and 0% is coming in for the not sure. So once again, thank you very much for your participation in these. Srijit, it's yours again.
Thank you, Ryan. So this is the last slide. We have just tried to draw up some of the scenarios. In fact, in the scenario number 2 was very aptly covered by Ed in his conversation when he spoke about the pandemic, the current pandemic, and this is very relevant in the current context, actually, where you have a pandemic cutting across the globe and different institutions from across the globe trying to join hands together. FHIR is a good way of really importing and exporting data into a cloud infrastructure, which can then be further analyzed for more relevant outcomes. We also, just to give you a sense of where FHIR can be adopted, think about a pharma company undertaking clinical trials in a very rare disease category and trying to come up with a therapy pathway. FHIR can be a useful tool to really bring in different data sets and then analyzing the data sets to come up with the right outcomes, actually. So just in a very brief manner, I'm conscious of the time. I just want to give time for questions. So, I think I'll end my presentation over there. Lovely. Thank you so much for giving us all the time and attention. Ryan, I'll move it back to you so that we can take some questions, actually.
Yes, well, thank you very much, all of you, for that insightful presentation. I'd like to invite the audience to continue sending their questions or comments right now with the questions window for this Q&A portion of the webinar. I've already received some questions, so we'll just get started with these ones. Our very first question asks, how realistic and how important is the global use of interoperability standards?
So I'm happy to take a stab at this one. First of all, I think what's really important is for people to be representing and accessing data the same way. The reality is that there are many, many regional differences. There are language differences. There are regulatory and legal differences. There are content differences depending upon where you are. So not necessarily everything can ever possibly be interoperable, because information relevant in one geographic jurisdiction may not be so relevant in others. But we ought to be able to access information, and particularly when you're talking about research, core information, like about the pandemic. Darn it, it's damn important when you're talking about COVID-19 to have clear, accurate, consistent data of what's going on everywhere where the pandemic reaches, which is everywhere. So it's very important. but just like the FHIR has the 80% rule for what's in the core spec, you got to allow for regional differences as well, which are always going to, almost always going to be part of the mixture. But let's get that core right, and let's get the infrastructure right, so there are no limitations to stop us from getting the information when we need it. Ed, you have comments on that?
Two cents on it. One of which is things like immunization, vaccination, yeah. With mobility, we need to know where people stand, and there are some. We can't do everything. I agree with Wayne totally, but there are some things that will make a huge difference because the world is mobile, and we need to be able to. Immunization, particularly, is something we need to track and understand.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer. Our next question would like to know, what can we do to make the wide set of persons and groups that can profit by the use of standards aware of standards and their value?
Well, that's a long haul. There are a number of initiatives in place that we're working on setting up. There's a new initiative that we have, HL7 is involved with IHE integrating the health enterprise, and HIMSS, the global consortium for e-health interoperability. We're working with local governments through the Global Digital Health Partnership to try to get everyone talking at the same table, and the hope of being able to provide best practices to help countries throughout adopt these things. We're working with the WHO. Ed mentioned that immunization tracking application. Working with them, and we're working to make sure that help get the possibilities of the technology in place in lower and middle income countries throughout the world, where they don't have the same resources as the US or Europe has to advance things. But it's a long haul. Basically healthcare affects every single living and post-living people in the world. And so it's a long haul to get there, and we need everyone involved, every people to understand, people to share the message and to contribute to it.
So only thing I'd add to that is the people that we need to inform don't know they need to be informed, and we need to find a way to get invited into more rooms so we can help them understand what's available to them. So it's this new community, and things are moving in that direction. I think we're doing a much better job now of engaging new people, new groups, and I think the accelerators are one way that's really helping that. And so we're getting better, but we're a long way to go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Our next question asks, what is the motivation of vendors to use interoperability standards over protecting their proprietary interests?
Well, in the US, we have the information blocking rules that are objectives that are part of the final rule. I mean, I think within HL7, there are different degrees of perception about how serious a problem this is. What we do know is that a lot of people used to complain about that in the past are doing so less now. I think it's kind of, especially in the age of COVID-19, to withhold data. It's just, I think people are starting to warm up to the idea of how important this is, and so I think attitudes change, and it takes a while for them to change, but nothing like a crisis to help bring it to the forefront.
I'm less optimistic. I think we need Noah's flood because most of the systems, go all the way back into the 70s and 80s, and all of this is new, and everything is built on everything else, and to throw that out and start all over again is extremely difficult to happen. I think it's more of trying to preserve what they have. It's because the whole system, everything is built into it, and the other part of that is nobody agrees what the perfect system is, and so if you change to one system, you still got the other set of people that are doing it. But again, if I'm in the business for being a proprietary system, I'm going to protect my proprietary. So I think it's going to be with us forever. We need to just simply find ways around it. FHIR offers that. Interoperability offers that. If we can get it enabled and be real.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question simply wants to know that do you see FHIR as a submission standard?
Now, let me answer that one. In my past world with CDISC and in the pharma industry, I'm pretty close to that one. And there's several different ways to answer that. The first point kind of already is. The FDA has been building infrastructure to bring in real world data, which is absolutely critical, particularly now with the COVID-19 pandemic response. And so it is a submission standard, but not for clinical trials data as part of new drug applications, not yet anyway. Recognizing the investment, it took the FDA something like 14 years, but from the point they expressed an interest in CDIS to actually requiring it. They move a little slowly. They recognize that they don't want to disrupt current systems until things are mature enough and ready to go. And we're just at the beginning stages of figuring that out. I certainly see a long-term role for CDISC that will fit with FHIR, in the world of research. But my view is we have to get out of the mindset that every time a new standard comes, we have to map to the old standard. We really need to take advantage of that initial picture where FHIR is in the middle, and we put things like CDISC in the OMOP model more on the periphery as what you do with the data to get it there, so you can use the tools that analyze it. So I see it's inevitable that'll happen. Can't really predict how long it is, but I'm excited that Vulcan's helping move that along faster, and we'll get there. Certainly a lot faster than it took us with CDISC.
The only thing I add to that is I think that FDA is moving much faster than it has moved in this entire history. And they've got some new groups, they've created new divisions, and clearly they're interested in staying more up to date. And I think we'll see this rapidly move. And I think everybody is understanding that if we speak the same language, conversations are quicker and easier. And not only that, the role of the FDA is changing tremendously. We've got algorithms, decision support. We've got wearable devices. All of those things come under the preview of the FDA. And just simply to handle that, they really got to update and use a lot of standards and analytics. But they're moving in that direction is a good news.
Well, thank you very much for that answer and for all of the answers. However, we reached the end of the question and answer portion of the webinar today. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at CITIUS Tech may follow up with you, or if you have further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on your screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in the chat box, and with this link, you'll be able to view a recording of this event on that page. And you can share this link with your colleagues as well, when they register, of course, for the recording there. So I do encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Srijit Nair, Ed Hammond, and Wayne Kubik. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.